2nd of April 1801 was no ordinary day for the citizens of Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. Dense white smoke engulfed the harbour, and the deafening sound of broadside pervaded the streets, interrupting day-to-day life. As one stood on the city ramparts, one would witness a sight to behold: two formidable battle fleets opposing each other and letting slip the dogs of war. The British line, commanded by Horatio Nelson, had managed to navigate through the shallows near Copenhagen in order to position himself within reach of the Danish naval defences and bombard them. Reflecting on the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, an encounter between the Danes and the Brits would rather seem odd. Great Britain, however, had their reasons to mount this attack on Denmark. This video will discuss this battle and why it was fought. Welcome to this month's episode of Heart of Oak. During the last years of the French Revolutionary Wars, which lasted from 1792 until 1802, the relationship of Britain with Russia and the Scandinavian countries deteriorated rapidly. During this period, Britain had kept a strict naval blockade of France. To enforce this ban on trade with its nemesis, the Royal Navy had claimed an unlimited right to halt and search neutral merchant shipping for French contraband. For Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Prussia and Russia, the blockade of France meant, quite frustratingly, the loss of an important market. Scandinavia was in fact the principal provider in Europe of essential naval supplies such as timber, tar and hemp. Furthermore, Britain's decision to retain the occupation of recently captured Malta further infuriated the Russian Emperor Paul. After breaking up his alliance with the British, the Tsar created the so-called League of Armed Neutrality with the Scandinavian kingdoms. Its aim was to preserve free trade, if necessary, by force. For London, this meant a pro-French stance, since it would enable the enemy to receive important supplies to reinvigorate their navy. This would jeopardize years of hard work the Royal Navy had invested into neutralizing the French fleet. By the end of 1800, open conflict was looming between the League and the British Isles. The Royal Navy had to act quickly and put the Scandinavian fleets out of action before their total of 123 ships of the line could join forces and form a single formidable battle fleet. If this happened, the Navy would stand no chance against such a numerical superiority, and Britannia could lose her primary trump card, namely the domination of the seas. The Admiralty appointed Admiral Hyde Parker to take command of the 18 men-of-war the Navy had assembled to counter the Baltic threat. Parker was by nature a cautious man. The new First Lord of the Admiralty, John Jervis, 1st Earl of St. Vincent therefore sent Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson as his second in command to inject some extra vigor into the expeditionary force. Soon enough, a strenuous relationship developed between Nelson and Parker. Parker's lack of impetus seriously frustrated his vice admiral. Furthermore, the two were at odds over which target to attack first. Nelson preferred an immediate assault on the heart and soul of the League, the Russians. The leader of the expedition, however, had decided they would engage the Danish fleet at Copenhagen first. Meanwhile, Parker's delays had given the Danes the opportunity to ready the defenses of the capital. When the Royal Navy had arrived in front of Copenhagen on the 30th of March, they were confronted by an astute line of warships anchored in front of the city. Nature proved to be a second line of defense for Denmark, as shoals festered the local waters. Having removed the hazard indicating buoys, the Danes thus provided the Royal Navy with the arduous task of navigating blindly through quite unfamiliar territory. The Danish line itself was situated in the King's Channel, a small stroke of navigable water between the harbour of Copenhagen and a long shoal called the Middle Grounds. On the night of the 31st of March, Captain Thomas Hardy took soundings by swinging the lead of the approach to the King's Channel in order to compensate for the missing Danish buoys. It was agreed that Nelson would engage the Danish line closely, entering the King's Channel from the south. The Vice Admiral would command 12 ships with a relatively shallow draft, while Parker kept the 6 heavier battleships in reserve to the north. The leading vessel of Nelson, HMS Edgar, would attack the Danish 5th ship, the Jylland, anchoring next to it for permanent engagement. The following British ship would pass behind the stationary Edgar, engaging the next Danish ship after having deployed her anchor as well. This maneuver would be repeated along the entire enemy line. As soon as the southern defenses had crumbled, the bomb vessels could then come within range of Copenhagen itself and would bring destruction from above with their mortars, thus forcing the Danes into submission. During the late morning of the 2nd of April, Nelson issued the order to attack. Soon thereafter, however, the Royal Navy suffered a major setback. 3 of the leading men-of-war, HMS Agamemnon, Bellona and Russell, had grounded on the Middle Ground before being able to take up their battle positions. The Vice Admiral quickly had to readjust his plan and send signals throughout the fleet, informing several ships of their new action stations in order to avoid gaps in his line. By 11 AM, the first British ship had reached her objective. HMS Edgar had successfully anchored opposite of the Danish 5th ship, the Jylland. By 11:45, all of Nelson's ships, except for the grounded ones, had joined the battle and let their broadsides thunder. From then on, the battle developed into a contest of courage and gunnery skills, with no room for tactics. Here was no maneuvering, it was downright fighting, as Nelson later recorded. The Danes offered a fiercer resistance than the British had anticipated, and both sides suffered considerable losses. Meanwhile, Admiral Hyde Parker, watching on from the north, had difficulty with assessing the situation, due to the sheer chaos. He started assuming the worst and sent signal 39 to Nelson, ordering to discontinue the engagement. This would spell disaster, as the only escape route lay alongside the formidable northern defences of Copenhagen. His vice-admiral knew better and disregarded the signal. It was at this moment that Nelson uttered to his flag captain the following words which would go down in naval history. "You know, Foley, I only have one eye. I have the right to be blind sometimes." And then, holding his telescope to his blind eye, said, "I really do not see the signal." Between 1230 and 1310, the disciplined gunnery of the British proved to be too much for 5 enemy ships as they disengaged, while the Danish flagship Dannebrog was left in flames. By 1330, the Royal Navy had mastered the southern defences, as by then already 13 Danes were largely or completely out of action. Subsequently, the bomb vessels as planned crept within range of the city. Being in this favourable position, Nelson believed it to be the right moment to open negotiations with Copenhagen, and sent an envoy to offer a truce. He said that despite his admiration for the gallantry of the defenders, he would have no other option than to sink the surrendered ships with all their wounded aboard if his offer were to be refused. A truce was agreed upon, and the guns fell silent. The next few days, Horatio Nelson was sent to the Danish capital to secure a favourable agreement with the government. An armistice was signed, which would last for 14 weeks, and Danish harbours would be open again for British trade. Although Nelson's victory undoubtedly played a major role in Danish acceptance of British terms, there was another factor which helps to explain Copenhagen's eagerness towards the British envoys. News of Tsar Paul's assassination on the 23rd of March had in fact reached the Danish capital around that time. The death of the prime advocate of the League of Armed Neutrality marked the beginning of the end for this alliance. Paul's successor, Alexander I, was indeed more inclined towards the British cause and hostile to the French revolutionaries. After news of Nelson's victory, as well as Parker's passive and faltering role in the campaign, had reached the ears of the Admiralty, it was decided upon that Nelson would henceforth lead the expedition. The new commander of the fleet immediately set course towards the Russian naval base at Reval. It was there that Nelson found out that the new Russian Emperor, Alexander I, had started dismantling the League. Subsequently, the Royal Navy could leave this odd and cold campaign behind itself and safely resume the naval blockade of France. Nelson once again had proven his worth and showed his country that he could be entrusted with the most crucial missions.